The IRS agent placed a single sheet of paper in front of my husband and his girlfriend, a 1099-MISC for $214,000 in unreported income. And Garrison's hand started trembling so hard that his $11 espresso wobbled right off the conference table and splashed across his Italian loafers. His attorney, a man who charged $475 an hour to look unbothered, actually flinched. And Garrison's girlfriend, this woman named Petra, who had been strutting around Nashville in jewelry I'd paid for, went so pale I thought she might slide right out of her chair. The federal agent didn't even look up. He just said, "Mr. Whitfield, we also have questions about the LLC registered in Ms. Novak's name." Garrison turned to me then. Sitting at the opposite end of that mahogany table in my navy blazer and reading glasses, looking exactly like what I am, a forensic auditor who had just handed the United States government a gift-wrapped case on a silver platter. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. I smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. But this story doesn't start in a federal building in downtown Nashville. It starts with a woman who loved spreadsheets more than she loved herself, and a man who mistook her quiet nature for stupidity. My name is Temperance Whitfield, née Ogik, 38 years old, born and raised in Antioch, just south of Nashville, the second of 4 kids in a household where the thermostat never went above 66 degrees in winter because my parents were splitting a single income 4 ways. My father drove a FedEx route. My mother cleaned houses in Belmead, which is the part of Nashville where people have estates instead of yards. She used to come home smelling like Mrs. Meyer's lavender cleaner and other people's comfort, and she'd sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a yellow legal pad and reconcile every dollar she'd earned against every dollar she'd spent, every single day. I'd sit next to her and watch the numbers line up, and there was something about it, the precision, the way a budget could tell the truth when people wouldn't. By 10 years old, I could balance a checkbook. By 14, I was doing our family's taxes with TurboTax and a highlighter. My grandmother on my father's side, Neoma, everyone called her Mama Ne, lived with us until I was 19. She was from Enugu, Nigeria originally, and she had this way of watching people that made you feel like she was reading your bank statement with her eyes. She used to grab my chin, look at me, and say, "Temperance, the person who controls the ledger controls the house." I thought she was talking about bookkeeping. She was talking about power. I went to Middle Tennessee State, studied accounting, got my CPA at 24, and by 27, I'd moved into forensic auditing for a mid-sized firm called Barlow and Keene. Forensic auditing, for those who don't know, is basically being a financial detective. Companies hire us when they suspect someone is stealing, cooking the books, or hiding money. My job, my actual daily job, was to look at a pile of numbers and find the lies buried inside them. I was good at it. Scary good. My supervisor once told me I had a pathological memory for irregularities. I could look at a P&L statement and feel when something was off, the way some people can hear a single instrument out of tune in an orchestra. It wasn't a party trick. It was just how my brain worked. The other thing about me, and this matters later, is that I never deleted anything. Not a text, not an email, not a bank notification. My phone had 47,000 unread emails at any given time, but every single one was searchable. My colleagues thought it was neurotic. Turns out neurotic is just another word for prepared. The dream I carried with me through all of this was small and specific. I wanted to buy my mother a house, not a mansion. This was just a 3-bedroom with a porch and a yard where she could grow tomatoes and never clean someone else's bathroom again. I'd been saving for years, a separate account, $200 a month since I was 25. By the time this story starts, that account had $31,400 in it. That summer before everything changed, I helped my cousin Emeka renovate a rental duplex he'd bought in East Nashville. I spent 3 weekends pulling up linoleum and learning how Tennessee property records worked, who owned what, how LLCs were structured, how you could trace ownership through the Register of Deeds online. Emeka joked that I was the only person who found county databases relaxing. He wasn't wrong. Remember that detail. It becomes important. I met Garrison Whitfield at a fundraiser for the Nashville Symphony in October of 2017. He was 35, tall, broad-shouldered, with this warm, baritone voice that made everything he said sound like the beginning of a toast. He managed a portfolio of commercial properties for a development group called Meridian South. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, and when he handed me a glass of Prosecco, he said, "You look like someone who actually reads the program notes." I laughed, and that was it. That was the hook. Here's what Garrison was in public: magnetic. He remembered everyone's name. He tipped 30%. He opened doors, pulled out chairs, and when he talked to you, he leaned in like whatever you were saying was the most fascinating thing he'd heard all week. Waiters loved him. His mother adored him. My friends called him the upgrade. My sister Adaisy said he was almost suspicious levels of charming. I should have listened to Hades. But the good times were genuinely good, and I need you to understand that. Because otherwise, the rest of the story doesn't make sense. You don't stay for 8 years with someone who's always terrible. You stay because Tuesday nights were homemade jollof rice and Jeopardy on the couch. And he'd shout wrong answers with such confidence that it made me cry laughing. You stay because he drove 2 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu and couldn't get out of bed. You stay because on your 30th birthday, he rented out the back room of Hattie B's Hot Chicken and invited every person you loved. And when he gave the toast, he said, "Temperance sees the truth in everything, and she still chose me. That's either love or a clerical error." Everyone laughed. I cried. We got married 4 months later in March of 2019 at a small ceremony at Cheekwood Estate. My mother wore a dress she'd bought on sale at Dillard's and looked like a queen. Mama Nang, who was 81 by then, squeezed my hand at the reception and said, "Watch where the money goes, Temperance. Always watch where the money goes." I thought she was giving me marriage advice about budgeting. She was giving me a warning. The first 2 years were good. We bought a house in Sylvan Park, a 1940s bungalow with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed updating. $387,000, both our names on the mortgage. We combined finances, which I now recognize as the financial equivalent of handing someone your passwords and hoping for the best. But that's what love does. It makes you stupid about money, which is ironic for a forensic auditor. That's like a locksmith leaving their front door open. The changes started small, so small that a normal person wouldn't notice them, and even I, the woman who could spot a $12 discrepancy in a $4 million ledger, told myself I was imagining things. In late 2020, Garrison started keeping his phone face down at dinner. Not always, just enough. One night, we were eating takeout pad thai from Thai Sane, and his phone buzzed 3 times in a row. He flipped it over, glanced at it, and tilted the screen away from me with this tiny, practiced motion. When I asked who it was, he said, "Work stuff, boring." Then he changed the subject to whether we should repaint the bathroom. 6 months later, he changed the password on his laptop. The old one had been our wedding date, March 16th, 19. He said he'd updated it for security reasons after a phishing email at work. That sounded reasonable. I'm an auditor. I understand phishing, but the new password wasn't shared with me, and when I pointed that out, he gave me this look, patient, slightly annoyed, and said, "Temperance, do you need to monitor every device I own?" He said it like I was the unreasonable one, like trust meant blindness. Then came the gifts. A new Michael Kors bag in November, a weekend trip to Asheville in December, a $300 gift card to the spa at the Hermitage Hotel in January, all unprompted, all slightly too generous for a man who, 6 months earlier, had complained about the cost of replacing our water heater. I didn't connect the dots yet, but the dots were there, forming a constellation I didn't want to read. And then, the fracture. It was a Thursday in February 2022. I remember because it was cold, maybe 28 degrees, and I'd come home early from work because Barlow and Keene had closed for a pipe burst. I walked into our house and heard Garrison on the phone in the bedroom. Door mostly closed, but not latched. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was trying to hang up my coat, but I heard him say, "She doesn't suspect anything, babe. She's too busy with her little spreadsheets." Babe. Little spreadsheets. I stood in the hallway holding my coat and my keys and a bag of groceries from Publix, chicken thighs, jasmine rice, a bunch of cilantro, and something inside me went very still. Not broken, just recalibrated. And that was just the beginning. The disrespect came first, the way it always does, not as a punch, but as a paper cut. We were at a dinner party at his colleague Fletcher's house in Green Hills. 8 people around a table, good wine, someone's homemade risotto. The conversation turned to careers, and Fletcher's wife Margot asked me about forensic auditing. I started explaining a case, nothing confidential, just the general process, and Garrison cut me off mid-sentence. Temperance basically just stares at spreadsheets all day, he said, swirling his Malbec. It's like watching paint dry, but with more decimals. Everyone laughed, politely. Margot gave me a look that might have been sympathy, and the conversation moved on. Garrison squeezed my knee under the table like the joke was affectionate. Like I should be in on it. I smiled. Because that's what you do when the alternative is making a scene over something that sounds small. But it wasn't small. He'd reduced my entire career, the thing I'd built from my mother's kitchen table with a calculator, to a punchline. After that night, the control tightened. Garrison suggested we consolidate our accounts for simplicity. He wanted to manage the investments because that's basically what I do for a living, babe. He started questioning my purchases, not big ones, just enough to make me feel watched. A $14 book from Parnassus, a $47 pair of running shoes from Fleet Feet. Do you really need another pair of shoes? He'd say, scrolling through the bank app on his phone. The same phone I wasn't allowed to touch. Meanwhile, his own spending was invisible to me. He'd set up a separate business account for Meridian South expenses, and transactions I used to see on our shared statements just disappeared. When I asked about it, he said, "You're not my accountant, Temperance. You're my wife. There's a difference. There's a difference." He said that like the two things were opposites, like being his wife meant turning off the part of my brain that could see what he was doing. Then I found the earring. It was a Thursday in April 2022. A small gold hoop stuck between the driver's seat and the center console of Garrison's Range Rover. Not mine. I don't wear hoops. I've worn the same pair of pearl studs since my mother gave them to me for my college graduation. I held this earring between my thumb and forefinger and felt something cold settle in my chest. When I showed it to him, he barely looked up from his phone. Probably one of the girls from the office. I gave Petra and Danny a ride to the client site last week. Petra, there's a name I want you to remember. It could have fallen out of anyone's ear, Temperance. You're doing that thing again. What thing? That thing where you turn nothing into something. You're always looking for problems. His voice was calm, almost bored. Like my suspicion was a character flaw he'd learned to tolerate. And that's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't feel like manipulation in the moment. It feels like maybe you really are the problem. Maybe you really are the person who turns nothing into something. Maybe the earring really did belong to a coworker, and you're just a paranoid woman clutching a piece of costume jewelry like it's evidence. So I put the earring in my dresser drawer, and I said nothing. The public humiliation escalated 2 months later. Garrison's mother, Vivienne Whitfield, hosted a 4th of July gathering at her home in Brentwood, a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial with a pool and the kind of landscaping that costs more annually than my parents' mortgage. Vivienne was a retired real estate broker who had never quite accepted that her son married a forensic auditor from Antioch instead of a Belmead debutante. She tolerated me the way you tolerate a piece of furniture that doesn't match the room. That afternoon, I was in the kitchen helping set up when Vivienne cornered me near the ice maker. She was holding a gin and tonic and wearing a smile that could cut glass. "Temperance, darling," she said. "Garrison told me you've been a little anxious lately. He's worried about you." "I'm fine, Vivienne." "Well," she sipped her drink, "it's just that he works so hard, and sometimes women in your position, and I mean this lovingly, sometimes they create problems because they're not intellectually stimulated enough at home. In my position, not intellectually stimulated enough. This woman was standing in a kitchen with $80,000 worth of Viking appliances, telling a forensic auditor that she wasn't smart enough to understand her own marriage. I said, "I appreciate your concern." Then I went outside and ate a hot dog alone by the pool, while Garrison played cornhole with his fraternity brothers and never once looked in my direction. The mustard was French's. The bun was stale. The loneliness was gourmet. The spatial violation happened in August. I came home from a 3-day work trip to Memphis. We were auditing a medical billing company and found that Garrison had reorganized my home office, which sounds harmless until you understand that my home office was where I kept personal files, backup drives, and 12 years of meticulously organized financial records. He'd moved everything into plastic bins in the garage and converted my office into a media room with a 75-inch Samsung TV and a leather recliner. "You never used that room anyway," he said when I stood in the doorway staring at the space that used to be mine. "I use it every weekend, Garrison." "For what? Staring at spreadsheets?" He laughed, that easy, charming laugh that used to make me feel warm and now made me feel erased. Come on, Temperance, this is way better. We can watch movies in here. We, like this was a shared decision. Like I'd been consulted. Like my 12 years of organized records hadn't been shoved into Rubbermaid containers and stacked between the lawnmower and a broken exercise bike. But here's the thing about being the kind of person who organizes 12 years of financial records. You notice when things are missing. And when I went through those bins that night in the garage, flashlight in hand, eating a granola bar at 11 p.m. like a raccoon going through someone's recycling, I noticed that one external hard drive was gone. The silver Western Digital, 2 terabytes, the one where I had backed up our joint tax returns, mortgage documents, and investment statements. Garrison said he hadn't seen it, said it must have gotten lost in the move, said I should have labeled things better. I didn't argue, I just made a note. Column A, what he said. Column B, what was true. The Ally attack came from an unexpected direction. Garrison's best friend since college, a man named Quentin Barr, showed up at my workplace, just walked into the Barlow and Keene lobby on a Tuesday afternoon in September, and asked the receptionist for me. When I came out, he was leaning against the front desk with this tight, uncomfortable smile. Temperance, can we talk? Privately? We went to the Starbucks across the street. He ordered a venti cold brew. I ordered nothing because my stomach was already in knots. Look, Quentin said, stirring his drink with a straw, not making eye contact. Garrison asked me to talk to you. He's thinking about a separation. And he wants you to know that he's already consulted a lawyer. A lawyer? He'd consulted a lawyer. He said you've been difficult, paranoid. He said you accused him of having an affair and it's making things impossible. Did he mention the earring? Quentin blinked. What earring? The gold hoop in his car, the phone calls, the new passwords, the missing hard drive. Did he mention any of that? Temperance? Quentin looked at me with something that was either pity or discomfort, and honestly, at that point, they felt identical. Garrison is a good guy. I've known him for 15 years. Maybe you're just going through something. Have you considered talking to someone, like a professional? A professional? He wanted me to see a therapist because I'd noticed my husband was lying to me. The audacity was almost beautiful, like watching someone try to put out a fire by telling the fire it's overreacting. The institutional threat landed 3 weeks later. I came home to find an envelope on the kitchen counter, a letter from an attorney named Dale Corrigan at a firm called Corrigan and Whitmore. It was a formal notification that Garrison had filed for legal separation and was requesting an equitable division of assets, including the house, our joint investment accounts, and, this part made me physically dizzy, my separate savings account, the one with $31,400, my mother's house fund. The letter stated that because Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, all marital assets were subject to division regardless of whose name they were in, and that Garrison's legal team intended to pursue a fair and comprehensive settlement. Fair, comprehensive. These are words that sound neutral until they're being used to take everything you have. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Garrison had proposed to me, the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals, and I read that letter twice. The numbers were all there. Our joint checking, $12,340. Our joint savings, $48,700. The house equity, approximately $140,000. My retirement fund, $167,000. His retirement fund, curiously, was listed as $23,500, which was roughly $100,000 less than it should have been for a man who'd been earning $185,000 a year for the past 6 years. And then there was the investment portfolio, the one Garrison had insisted on managing, the one I'd been quietly locked out of for over a year. The letter listed its value as $87,000. That number was wrong. I knew it was wrong the way I know my own name. Because 18 months earlier, before Garrison changed all the passwords and moved my office to the garage, I'd seen that portfolio. Its value then was $341,000. $254,000 had gone somewhere, and Garrison's lawyer was pretending it didn't exist. Now here's where the cruelest moment happened. Not the money. Money is numbers. Numbers I can fight. The cruelest moment was a Wednesday in October, 3 days after I received that letter. Garrison came home late, 10:30 p.m., and I was sitting on the couch in the living room, not watching TV, just sitting. He walked in, saw me, and sighed. this deep theatrical sigh like I was an obstacle between him and his bed. What now, Temperance? Where were you? Dinner with clients, you know this. You smell like perfume. He stopped, looked at me, and then he said something I will never forget because it was the most precisely calibrated cruelty I've ever experienced from another human being. You know what your problem is, Temperance. You're a woman who counts other people's money for a living, and you can't figure out why nobody wants to come home to that. Your mother counted pennies her whole life, and what did it get her? A bad back and a rental apartment. You're turning into her. And honestly, that's why this marriage is over. My mother. He brought my mother into it. The woman who'd cleaned houses so I could go to college. The woman who'd never asked for anything. He used her as a weapon, as proof that I was small and destined to stay small, and he did it with the same easy smile he used to charm waiters and win over strangers. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at him, standing there in his Tom Ford jacket that cost more than my mother's monthly rent, and something inside me went very, very quiet, not broken, finished. I got up, went to the garage, opened the third Rubbermaid bin from the left, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Garage, the same kind my mother used to reconcile her earnings every night. And I started writing, column A, what he'd taken, column B, where it went, column C, how I was going to get it back. What Garrison didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd started building my case 4 months before that night. The moment I noticed the missing $254,000 from the investment portfolio, the auditor in me had woken up like a smoke detector, finally responding to a house that had been burning for a year. Remember when I told you about that summer helping my cousin Amika with the rental duplex? About how I'd spent weekends learning Tennessee property records and LLC structures? That wasn't a fun family project anymore. That was training. In June 2022, 3 months before Quentin showed up at my office, I had started searching the Tennessee Secretary of State's business database. I was looking for Garrison's name and I didn't find it, which was suspicious in itself because a commercial property manager usually has his name attached to at least a few LLCs. What I found instead was an LLC called Ember Ridge Holdings, registered in May 2021 with a registered agent named Petra Novak, Petra, the co-worker who'd allegedly dropped an earring in my husband's car, the woman whose name Garrison said so casually, like she was just another colleague, just another ride to a client site. Ember Ridge Holdings had purchased a condominium in the Gulch, Nashville's trendiest neighborhood, for $380,000 in August 2021. The down payment was $76,000, paid from a bank account I'd never seen, at a bank where neither Garrison nor I held any accounts, or so I thought. Here's where my profession became my weapon. Forensic auditing is, at its core, the art of following money through systems designed to hide it. You trace deposits, cross-reference dates, identify patterns in transfers, and reconstruct financial timelines that people have worked very hard to erase. I do this for corporations. I've uncovered embezzlement schemes involving 7-figure sums and fraudulent billing operations spanning multiple states. My husband's amateur financial shell game was, by professional standards, embarrassingly transparent. But I didn't rush. Mama Ine's voice was in my head. The person who controls the ledger controls the house. I needed the ledger, the complete one. I contacted a lawyer, not through a referral, not through anyone who might know Garrison. I found Reshma Anand through the Tennessee Bar Association's directory, specifically searching for attorneys who specialized in forensic divorce. Reshma was 52, sharp as a scalpel, and the first thing she said to me was, "Bring me everything, and I mean everything. Don't filter, don't summarize, give me the raw data." Music to an auditor's ears. Over the next 2 months, here's what I assembled. The joint tax returns I'd backed up before Garrison lost my hard drive. I had copies on a cloud server he didn't know about because I'm the kind of person who backs up her backups. Those returns showed his reported income, which I could compare against his actual spending. Bank statements from our joint account going back 3 years, downloaded to my work laptop before he changed the passwords. These showed a pattern of cash withdrawals. $800 here, $1,200 there, always under the threshold that triggers automatic reporting. Over 22 months, those withdrawals totaled $38,400. The Ember Ridge Holdings LLC filing, which I'd pulled from the Secretary of State's website, showing Petra Novak as the sole member and registered agent. The Davidson County Register of Deeds record for the Gulch condo, showing the purchase price, the mortgage holder, and, critically, a quitclaim deed filed 6 months after purchase, adding Garrison Whitfield's name as a co-owner. He'd put his name on property purchased through his girlfriend's LLC with money siphoned from our marriage. And he'd done it through a quitclaim deed, which in Tennessee doesn't require the other spouse's consent. He thought he was clever. He was just sloppy. But the biggest find, and the one that turned this from a messy divorce into a federal matter, came from Garrison's employer. Meridian South had a vendor portal that Garrison used to process expense reimbursements. Through a public records request related to a separate audit, technically unrelated, ethically gray, but I'll let you judge, I discovered that Garrison had been submitting inflated expense reports for 2 years. Fake client dinners, fabricated travel costs, phantom consulting fees paid to, you guessed it, Ember Ridge Holdings. The total? $214,000 in fraudulent reimbursements funneled through a fake LLC into a bank account controlled by his girlfriend, used to buy a condo where they apparently played house while I sat at home wondering why my marriage was dying. $214,000 in tax fraud. Not just marital deception, federal tax fraud. Because Ember Ridge Holdings had never reported that income. Petra hadn't filed a single return for the LLC. And Garrison had claimed those fake expenses as business deductions on our joint returns. Returns I'd signed. That last part hit me like a bucket of ice water. My name was on those returns. If the IRS came looking, I was liable too. Unless I could prove I had no knowledge and had been actively deceived, which meant I needed to act fast, act precisely, and act first. Rishma connected me with a forensic CPA named Darian Lusk who specialized in IRS whistleblower cases. Darian was a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke in complete sentences and never used contractions, which made everything he said sound like a legal filing. He reviewed my evidence and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, you have a textbook case for IRS Form 211, the whistleblower claim, textbook, and given the amounts involved, you may be entitled to between 15 and 30% of any recovered taxes." I wasn't doing this for a bounty, but I won't pretend the math didn't cross my mind. We filed the whistleblower complaint in November 2022. Simultaneously, Reshma filed a counterpetition in our divorce case, alleging dissipation of marital assets, financial fraud, and concealment of property. The counterpetition included 43 pages of documentation, bank records, property filings, expense report comparisons, and a timeline so detailed it read like a prosecution brief. I'd also done one more thing, something small, something Garrison would never have expected because he thought I was just a woman who stared at spreadsheets. I'd gone to the Gulch condo building on a Saturday morning, parked my Honda Civic across the street, and sat there with a coffee from Frothy Monkey and a camera with a telephoto lens I'd borrowed from my friend Kira, who photographed weddings. I sat there for 4 hours, and in those 4 hours, I photographed Garrison entering the building with his key, Petra greeting him at the door in a bathrobe, and the two of them standing on the balcony drinking mimosas at 10 a.m. on a Saturday that Garrison had told me he'd be at the office catching up on reports. Column A, what he said. Column B, what was true. Column C, photographs. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday in January 2023. It was 38 degrees outside, overcast, the kind of Nashville winter day that looks like someone put a gray filter on the sky. Garrison believed we were meeting for a standard divorce mediation at his attorney, Dale Corrigan's office on Music Row. He'd been smug for weeks, texting me about keeping things civil and being reasonable about the settlement. His proposed terms, he'd keep the house, I'd keep my retirement fund minus a 40% equalization payment, and we'd split the joint savings. He walked into that conference room like he owned it. Charcoal suit, fresh haircut, that wide Garrison smile. Petra wasn't there, she wasn't supposed to be, but Dale Corrigan was, and so was Garrison's financial advisor, a man named Webb who looked like he sold insurance at a country club. On my side of the table, me, Reshma, and Darian Lusk. Garrison looked at my team and chuckled. "You brought reinforcements, Temperance? I thought this was supposed to be simple." "It is," I said. "It just takes a minute." Reshma opened her briefcase and placed a single folder on the table. Manila, thick. She slid it across to Dale Corrigan. "Before we discuss any settlement," Reshma said, "my client would like to present a full accounting of marital assets, including those omitted from your client's initial disclosure." Dale opened the folder. I watched his face. It went through about 4 expressions in 3 seconds: confusion, recognition, discomfort, and something close to nausea. "What is this?" Garrison said, leaning over to look. His smile was still there, but it had frozen like a screensaver. "That," Reshma said, "is documentation of Ember Ridge Holdings, LLC, registered to Petra Novak, funded by $38,400 in diverted marital funds and $214,000 in fraudulent expense reimbursements from your employer. Page 14 shows the quitclaim deed, adding your name to a condominium at 1212 Laurel Avenue, Unit 4B. Page 22 shows 17 months of cash withdrawals from your joint account. Page 31 shows the 1099-MISC that should have been filed for the LLC's income, and wasn't." The room got very quiet. Garrison's smile was gone, completely gone. His jaw was working like he was trying to chew through what was happening, and his eyes, those warm, charming eyes that had looked at me across a symphony fundraiser and made me believe in something, went flat, dead flat. "This is Temperance, what did you do?" "My job." Dale Corrigan put the folder down carefully, the way you'd set down something that might explode. "Corrigan, Garrison, I need to speak with you privately." "We're not finished," Reshma said. Page 38, "The IRS has been notified. A whistleblower complaint was filed 8 weeks ago. My client has been granted innocent spouse relief under Section 6015, meaning she is not liable for any fraudulent deductions filed without her knowledge. Your client, however—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Garrison stood up. His chair scraped back against the hardwood floor. His hands were on the table, and I could see them shaking. Not dramatically, just a tremor, like a fault line shifting. "You went to the IRS?" His voice cracked on the last word. "You went to the federal government over a marriage?" "Over $214,000 in tax fraud," Darian Lusk said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "which, for the record, is a felony." Garrison looked at Dale. Dale looked at the table. Webb, the financial advisor, had pushed his chair back about 6 inches, like he was physically trying to distance himself from the blast radius. And then the door opened. 2 people walked in. One was a man in a navy suit with an IRS criminal investigation badge clipped to his belt. The other was a woman from Meridian South's legal department carrying a separate folder, the one containing Garrison's fraudulent expense reports, which the company had been quietly reviewing for the past month after receiving an anonymous tip. An anonymous tip that I had absolutely nothing to do with, officially. Unofficially, Kira's husband worked in Meridian South's compliance department, and sometimes people talk at dinner parties. Garrison looked at the IRS agent. He looked at the Meridian South attorney. He looked at Dale, who was now actively avoiding eye contact. And then he looked at me. "Temperance?" I picked up my coat, my purse, my coffee, still warm from the Starbucks downstairs, a grande oat milk latte that cost $6.45 and was worth every penny. "Goodbye, Garrison." 6 words. I walked out of that conference room, and I did not look back. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes falling in slow motion, each one a little bigger than the last. Within 2 weeks, Meridian South terminated Garrison for cause: gross misconduct, expense fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. No severance, no reference. His professional reputation in Nashville's commercial real estate community, which is small enough that everyone knows everyone's business, was functionally destroyed by the end of the month. Within a month, the IRS opened a formal investigation into Ember Ridge Holdings. Petra Novak, who had apparently never considered that putting her name on a fraudulent LLC might have consequences, hired a criminal defense attorney. The condo in the Gulch was frozen as a potentially fraudulently acquired asset. Petra, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, moved back in with her parents in Murfreesboro. She was 28. Within 2 months, Garrison's divorce filing was withdrawn and replaced by a settlement agreement drafted by Reshma that was, to use a technical term, devastating. I received the house, full ownership, with Garrison's name removed from the deed. I received 70% of the remaining joint assets based on the documented dissipation. My separate savings account, my mother's house fund, was untouched, and Garrison was ordered to pay $24,000 in attorney fees. His retirement fund, the one his lawyer had listed as $23,500, the actual balance was $4,200. He'd cashed out the rest to fund his life with Petra. That wasn't my problem anymore. Quentin Barr, the friend who'd come to my office to tell me I was paranoid, sent me a text in March that said, "Hey Temperance, I owe you an apology. I didn't know." I read it. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter and too cheap to accept. Vivian Whitfield, the mother-in-law who'd told me I wasn't intellectually stimulated enough, called me once in February. She said, "I hope you're satisfied with what you've done to this family." I said, "Vivian, your son committed federal tax fraud. I just did the math." She hung up. We haven't spoken since. I sleep fine. Garrison's final contact came in April 2023, a voicemail 47 seconds long. He sounded tired, smaller, like someone had let the air out of him. "Temperance, it's me. I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. I know you won't believe me, but I am. I lost everything. The job, the condo, Petra left. She's cooperating with the IRS now, so yeah, I just wanted you to know that I know I messed up. And I'm sorry about what I said about your mom. That wasn't okay. Anyway, I hope you're doing well." I listened to it once, then I deleted it. Not because I was angry, because I was done. Done carrying his voice in my head, done translating his words, done auditing his intentions. The ledger was closed. I sold the house in Sylvan Park in June 2023 for $465,000. The Nashville market had been kind to me, even if my marriage hadn't. After paying off the remaining mortgage, I cleared $218,000. Combined with my savings, I had enough. In August 2023, I bought my mother a house, not a mansion, a 3-bedroom ranch in Antioch, 4 blocks from the house where I grew up. It had a porch with a swing, a backyard big enough for a garden, and a kitchen with granite countertops that she touched with her fingertips like they were made of something precious. She cried. I cried. My sister, Adaiz, cried. Even Emeka cried, and he's the kind of man who considers blinking to be an excessive emotional display. The first thing my mother did was plant tomatoes, Roma and Cherokee Purple, because she said you need one for cooking and one for eating right off the vine. The second thing she did was sit at her new kitchen table, a solid oak table I'd picked up at a vintage shop on Gallatin Pike, and she pulled out a yellow legal pad and a calculator. "Old habits," she said, smiling. I sat down next to her, the way I used to when I was 10 years old, watching the numbers line up, and I thought about Mama Annie, who'd passed away the year before, who'd squeezed my hand at my wedding and told me to watch where the money goes. The person who controls the ledger controls the house. She was right. She was always right. I'm 38 now. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that costs $1,350 a month. It's small. The water pressure is inconsistent. The neighbor's dog barks at exactly 6:12 a.m. every single morning, which is annoying but also means I never need an alarm clock. My home office, my real home office, not a garage, has a desk, a lamp, and a filing cabinet with 12 years of financial records, organized by year, by category, by color-coded tab. On the wall above my desk, I hung a framed photo of Mama Ni, taken at my college graduation. She's squeezing my hand. She's smiling like she already knows how the story ends. I still don't delete emails. I still back up my backups. I still look at numbers and find the lies buried inside them. The difference now is that I also trust what I see. I don't second-guess the evidence. I don't let anyone tell me that noticing the truth is the same thing as creating problems. Last Tuesday, I made jollof rice for the first time since my divorce. I ate it on the couch, watching Jeopardy, shouting wrong answers with full confidence. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. It was the best meal I'd had in years.